So this took a little while to pull together because there's so many different rabbit holes we can go down. So let me first apologize for only hitting the highlights. And as interest and comments come in, we'll dive into other aspects. So let's talk a little bit about our money system and what's going on there. So our banking system is absolutely 100% corrupt. And I know people will say, oh, that can't be true. And that's not the case. But the reality is, if you do the research, and there's several videos we posted on Twitter with regards to how this is all happening, you're going to be astounded to learn that our money is based on debt and not on assets, as we were taught to believe. So let's talk a little bit about some of the beginnings here. So our banking system has to change. For centuries, people have bartered and traded goods to acquire for their day-to-day lives. And it's only in the last 150 years that we introduced fiat currency, paper money, into our lives. It was a promissory note, for lack of better terms, and that's what checks are as well. So prior to that, think Pirates of the Caribbean and before, we had pieces of 8, silver doubloons, and other currencies out there. So go back further and you had other coins that were sanctioned by your local king or magistrate. With those types of currencies, we encountered counterfeiting. It's a shaving process where we would peel off little bits and pieces and be able to construct and steal from people in doing so. Whether we were recasting lead and coating it with gold or others, but that's why we have anti-counterfeiting in our paper money as well. So as we started to use these dollars that were initially 1 for 1, in other words, you could put an ounce of an ounce of silver, and whatever the market rate for an ounce of silver was, you'd get back in coin or currency. The same thing with gold. But as we started to learn, there is a process called fractional reserve banking. So the way this works, let me kind of run you through it. It's a massive Ponzi scheme. So in other words, the bank, you go ahead and deposit, let's say $1,000. Their requirement is they have to reserve 100. They can loan 900 out. But that loan document, the promise to repay, now becomes an asset. So 900 plus your original 1,000 deposit is now 1,900 bucks in the system. So we have that loan document of $900, just like a deposit, can be utilized as collateral to loan. So again, 90% of that, $810, can be loaned out. And against that, we now have $2,700 that are out in the system. But the banks legitimately only has $190, and then so on and so forth. So it keeps going further down. But the problem it runs into when we get a run on the bank. So what happens is these are all promises to pay. The loans, remember, anytime you get a credit card or mortgage, the bank can demand payment in full. And that they can, much like in the stock market, do a margin call and say, okay, and we want it all. So keep that in mind. A lot of agreements include that. So when there's a lack of faith in the system, we get a run on the bank where people come and demand their money. But now it's only in fiat dollars, which are only as good as the governments that run them. Look at Venezuela, look at Greece. We've had runs on banks that resulted in bank holidays to cool things off. And we've had in Greece, there were at least a week or two where banks were shut down. So when a system starts to melt down, that indeed is the only way they can slow the whole thing down. So 8 years ago, when Greece had their meltdown, they started taking money out of the banks, and the banks had to close as the economy collapsed in Greece. The banks availed themselves of those remaining deposits to bail themselves out, and that's called a bail-in. And to this day, many people lost their fortunes that had been saved in the bank or safe deposit boxes, but the banks were saved. So that's theft by your bankers on your assets. Now, we have the depository trust insurance company here within America, but think about this. If people lose faith in the government and the insurance, depository trust insurance defaults, you're not going to get what they promised to cover. And originally, when I started banking in the 70s, they covered up to 100 grand. Now it's $250,000, but still, it's only funny money. It's not gold or silver. So the lesson to learn from this that everybody should take away is never hold your funds electronically in any financial institution. That includes stock market. So count on when you put it in the market, count on it being gone. It has to be money that you're willing to part with, let alone if you put it in a safe deposit box. Those people in Greece are a great example. They have no obligation to give you your goods, just an IOU if they close. So all it takes is a turn of markets and suddenly that can be wiped out. Remember, I'm not a financial advisor, but I do recommend you hold your wealth in tangible assets, precious metals, aka gold, and your day-to-day expenses should be in silver, just in case of this type of situation. Additionally, have at least a month's bills in cash in your possession in case a bank failure happens. You can then make the transition to another bank or another form of asset a bit easier than others can and still purchase your day-to-day needs. Remember, you can only prepare for so much, but make sure you're covering for your family. The depth of this control of the banks goes back to the Rothschild families, and all of them are interlinked. So do realize it's not just a one thing to fix, but instead a slew of connections that need to be severed, and many have to be arrested. It doesn't matter who gets elected. If you run the banking system, you control it all. So this is a flowchart of just how interconnected everything is. And keep in mind, you don't even see the banking system listed here, but they're there and they're run by the Rothschilds. So they don't care who gets in power. Ultimately, they control it all. So keep that in mind. So you ask, what do I do? Well, to get out of the system, you can buy what's called rounds or coins, bars, and other collectibles. I'm particular to this particular type of asset. It's called a Valcambi bar. These are interesting in that all you have to do is bend them on their scoring, and they break off almost perfectly. So this is a picture of a 50-gram gold Valcambi bar. So each gram, there's just over 28 grams in an ounce. So you can do the math. Today, gold closed over 2,000. So do the math. You can figure out what a gram's worth. Similarly, silver has the same thing. This is a 100-gram Valcambi bar. So I don't have any affiliation with APMEX, but there is a link here. You can get these and order them direct. I've had great experiences with these guys over the years. And if you want something that's quick and easy to get, those are great. Something everyone should be aware of, though, just like in Greece, is that desperate governments do desperate things. We've had gold confiscation here in the United States for the good of the people, when in reality, it's only for the good of the wealthy elite. So bullion is not recommended as your primary store of wealth. Instead, buying collectibles will preserve it, albeit at a premium, but you can help avoid confiscation this way. Additionally, find somewhere to store it that's not usual. It may be a wise thing to do in these very near days. Anything is possible, and if your family's survival is in question, I do what's best for my family before anything else. So keep all of that in mind. And as we move down this path, there's some things to keep in mind. We want honest money, and we want the ability to track things, which is why a couple of years ago, whether you realize it or not, we introduced the quantum financial system. It's been instantiated globally, and last year there were a number of central banks, actually over 100 of them, that actually connected to the system. And as of today, March 7th, banks within the United States had to be compliant. which tells us a new currency and a new way of banking is just around the corner. So keep that in mind, folks. So why do I bring all this up? There are several things in no certain order that have to occur very shortly here, and you need to be ready. And this will keep you from experiencing any hardships. So keep that in mind. A lack of faith in our current currency is going to cause a failure of the market as well as our currency. Our current system will then collapse. Then we'll transition to a new system and then revalue what was left over from the old to the new, and services will then resume. How this happens and how seamlessly it happens is going to be up to a number of things. I'm sure we've missed a few things, but these are the big steps that have to occur very quickly here. If you're not prepared, it's going to be very disruptive. So keep that in mind. The first thing, lack of faith in our current currency, we're seeing that now. With the quantitative easing that occurred over the last 15 years, we have currency that's devalued beyond tracking, which is why they quit reporting on the first two tiers of the money supply about a year ago. And this is also backed up in that as we banned Russia, they're now making their exchanges in rubles. The reason is they prepared by hoarding gold, and their currency is backed by gold. They're paying their debts now in rubles, and the US dollar has become questionable as the world currency standard at this point. Listen to this.
Доллар пользовался очень большим доверием во всем мире. Это почти единственная была универсальная валюта мировая. Зачем-то Соединенные Штаты начали использовать долларовые расчеты как инструмент политической борьбы. Вводить ограничения на использование доллара. Своими руками начали пилить сук, на котором сидят. Но скоро они грохнутся. Доллары сокращаются как резервная валюта во многих государствах мира. Иран ограничивает в долларовых расчетах, на Россию вводит какие-то ограничения, на другие страны. Это подрывает доверие к доллару. Неужели это непонятно? Своими руками уничтожают доллар.
So there you have it. And this was 2.5 years ago. So keep that in mind. We did the same thing to Iraq before we invaded. So if you're not familiar with that story, there's an earlier video on this. But what we did originally, it took $4 US for every one Iraqi dollar. And before we invaded, we devalued their currency to the point where 1,800 Iraqi dollars makes $1 US today. So that is exactly what's happening with our currency, and it's being done by our own government. So realize the currency is already in collapse. So once that happens, we're going to have the collapse of our current system. You're seeing the meltdown of the stock market, which is one of those key indicators that our system is imploding. Remember, they've been pointing for the last 15 years at the stock market as a measure of how good things really are. You're seeing the markets collapse as the propping up of the market stopped a while back. So now that no one is pumping air in the tires, the holes in the tires are letting the air out, and it's quickly going to go south. So keep that in mind. If you watch, for me, every day we see a down market, I know we're closer to that transition. So once that happens, we'll transition to our new system, and this will be easier than most realize. The infrastructure for QFS is already in place and has been for a couple of years. So testing of some of this occurred, and we're seeing some of the results of this. So moving over to this system from the older SWIFT system is going to be quite easy for banking. The revaluation is the one everybody's wondering about. So how does that impact me? What does that do to my old money and things like that? So as we trade in our old money for new, we'll receive it at the market rates that will be reset, and some that have been artificially depressed. Think Iraq, I just talked about. Vietnam, their dong is absolutely manipulated, and Indonesian rupiah is another great example. These will receive a boost to their currency as the normalization and stabilization take effect. No longer will it be financially beneficial to hire children in foreign countries to do the labor, slave labor, that is. So labor will be more normalized and justly compensated across the planet and change in increments to reflect just compensation. So additionally, those of us that have held foreign currency will be able to cash it in to receive the benefits of those investments. So for example, if you bought dinar over the last couple of years, you could easily, for less than $300, get over $1 million in Iraqi dinar. So think about what the value of the dinar was before we devalued it and invaded Iraq. Getting it reset just to a 1-for-1 parity with the US dollar, that would be amazing. So we're literally looking at people that are holding easily $500,000 to $1 million of dinar based on a $300 or $400 investment. So keep that in mind. And currency speculation is not for the novice, but it's something that if you know what's coming and the revaluation is coming, you can easily make some great investments as a result. Finally, we'll get resumption of services. In other words, back to normal. And this is back to day-to-day life. The difference here is we won't be on a system that is based in debt. Remember, our currency, as we saw above, is based on debt. The more loans we create, the more money we create. The currency instead will have value, and it's going to be based on assets that are real, like gold. And we won't be hit with artificially induced inflation or deflation at the whim of the central banks and our own Federal Reserve. So the question you need to ask is, are you ready for this transition? Do you have something to tide you over during the transition? Minimally, food and other basics for a couple months on hand. Some things will be disrupted, and it's hard to say how this will impact our ability to get common goods. So I highly recommend it. Worth noting today, so gold hit a historic high. It broke over $2,000 an ounce. Yeah, are you holding? You know, I bought back when it was 1,400. So we're talking, whoa, that was 7 years ago. So are you holding? If not, it's going to go higher. And as we move to sound money, as with all investments, make sure you have what you need. But note, the intrinsic value of precious metals is rarely lost, only to be recovered over time. So do your diligence and ensure you're ready. I've got a neighbor who ignores all this, secure in his knowledge of how our system has operated for the last 50 years. Unfortunately, that's not completely sound logic, as things are changing. So stretch your thoughts on this, be teachable, and examine it for your own benefit. Take a look at the prices of gold and silver. Right now, it's still on sale. Get it while you can. It's going to definitely go up significantly. All right. So one other thing, there was a summit. I wanted to share this with you. This was the summit between Putin and Biden. I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, you again. You again. Idiot. Yeah.
Shalom.